This is the August variety of RidgeBot's demo day, where we'll highlight a number of different scenarios that you can use to your advantage when reducing risks in your environments and defensive controls. As a way of getting started, an introduction to the team. On the left is me. I'm Dennis Cassidy, Regional Sales Director here at Ridge Security. I've been here for about 2 years now and have spent the last 10 in cybersecurity. I'm also joined by Kevin Sisney, our subject matter expert here. Kevin, I don't know if you'd like to do a brief introduction for the folks on the line.
Hi, team. Kevin Sisney. Like yourselves, I spent quite a few years as a practitioner, north of 15, running tools like RidgeBot in the wild, vulnerability and risk management tools, EDR, XDR, things to that nature. I'm really looking forward to showing you how RidgeBot can reduce risk in the environment.
Thank you, Kevin. Now, before we get started, I wanted to give more of a refresher or an introduction to RidgeBot. RidgeBot is our flagship product here at Ridge Security. RidgeBot is an automated offensive security platform that uses AI to think like a hacker, make decisions like a hacker, and identify risks in environments. On one side of the coin, there's two different testing methodologies within one platform. On one side of the coin is automated penetration testing. This is RidgeBot identifying vulnerabilities and exploitable vulnerabilities in networks, internal, external, websites, web applications, APIs, etc. Within RidgeBot, there are a number of pre-built system scenarios. Kevin will be walking through one of them today. The other side of the coin, which is another testing methodology within the one platform of RidgeBot, is breach and attack simulation. So here's where RidgeBot will be able to test the efficacy of your defensive controls, your Active Directory, data loss prevention tools, etc. So both methodologies are two sides of the same coin, and we'll be covering both of these sides today. Now, before we get started, I did want to point out that there is a new category known as adversarial exposure validation on the Gartner Hype Cycle for security operations. Ridge Security was identified as one of the key players in this space, which bridges the gap between not just automated pen testing, but also breach and attack simulation. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Kevin, where we can start with Windows Authenticated Testing. Now, this is if an attacker got into your network and was able to gain some credentials and able to move laterally. So Kevin, I don't know if you want to take it away from here and we can get started.
I will. Let me share my screen.
And let me stop.
All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a pen test task that is looking at specific domain, and we're going to provide that with domain credentials. So what I need to do is I need to create a new task. I need to choose my Windows Authenticated Pen Testing scenario, which was one of our system or out-of-the-box scenarios. There we go. I need to give it a good name. Okay, I need to grab my target and put that in there. I'm going to put it in my name as well as my input target. I don't need to exclude anything. I need to put in my domain information. So let me do that. Make sure I don't have a space in there. And then I need to put in my credentials. And that password. So I can give this any level of credentials. If I want to do more of a gray box test, I can put in a standard user. If I'm looking to do white box testing, I can put in an admin credential, and I can put in as many credentials as need be. I can, with RidgeBot, run it now, schedule it to run once. If I've got a set of assets that I want to test on a regular basis, I can do Sundays and Thursdays for workstations or what have you. So I can put this on, a continuous threat exposure management, have a look at my domain, pen test my domain, like an attacker has obtain credentials and is then trying to access and move laterally. I don't need to do anything in recon mode. I can change my ports if need be. Looking at exploitation, I don't need to do anything there. And I also need to allow lateral movement since I'm looking at my domain very quickly, leaving everything fairly best practices after putting my domain information in. And I'm running a Windows Authenticated pen test against one or a number of targets in my environment.
Now, Kevin, I just wanted to jump in here. One thing I noticed during the setup is it's relatively easy to set up. You don't necessarily need to be a certified ethical hacker in order to set up the scenario, correct?
RidgeBot, no, that's very correct. RidgeBot is one of those tools that, you know, with a 2 or 3 training sessions, I can have an entry-level analyst very well up to speed. In 1 or 2 sessions, I can have an advanced pen tester or a red teamer knowing where to take the information that RidgeBot gathers and then be able to pivot that into human-led pen testing to use their brains to do what they do, the expertise. So multiple different ways, multiple levels of analysts can use and be very effective with RidgeBot. There is no code, there is no extensive setup. It's literally 2 to 5 minutes and 3 to 5 mouse clicks, and you're off and running a Windows Authenticated pen test against either one or a set of domain assets. Now, I've got one that's completed. Let's take a look at that while this one's running. So as I go into the pen testing dashboard, I see a lot of good information. I see my total targets, my overall score out of 100, my number of attack paths, my attack surface. Red and skull and crossbones is obviously bad, and I can jump to some pen test data from the node detail, but I'm going to go across the bottom and we'll take a look at all of this. If I look at my topology, it's a very simple topology. I'm doing a very extensive test. I've got my target, found 0 login. If I go to my task summary, I can see that I didn't have to run very many jobs because this is a very specific set of plugins and risk that I'm looking for. Again, my score out of 100. I've found 7 vulnerabilities across an attack surface number of 14, and RidgeBot was able to exploit one of those. I get a full attack log download if need be. Sorry. I get my full attack surface, ports, services, applications, any sites, and any URLs that are being hosted on that particular asset. But very quickly, I can see what's going on with this asset, see where my Windows issues are. I've got a credential harvesting issue. That's not good. I've also got 0 login and some print spooler issues going on with this particular target. If I look at my risk table, I can feel fairly confident that this is a 0 false positive risk because RidgeBot's going to provide evidence to that. So you can see here, my credential harvesting was able to get the admin, a guest password, and a default account password. I can look at the credential audit, see that these 4 users have reused passwords. I can see the active domains. No attack path since it's credential harvesting, but very quickly I can take this. If I'm an experienced pen tester or red teaming, I can go to this and use these credentials and see how much further I can advance that human pen testing. Any questions on that and what that looks like in the environment? I can also create reporting based on that pen test. I can do an executive summary and take out all the asset details. Or I can do standard, I can do raw data. If you're a PlexTrack shop, we can do a PlexTrack extract as well. I generate that, I let that cook. It's being built in my report section, but I happen to have one already done. So let me make this a little bit bigger. You can see that my task name became my report name. If you want to customize the reports and bring a logo in, it will be right here. I've got my date and timestamp of my pen test. Legalese. authenticated pen testing methodology, which is a good explainer of why and what we're doing. Talks about elevation of privileges, credential harvesting, and then the start of my executive summary. It's going to talk about my testing, show my score, explain my scoring, show all of my vulnerabilities, also my exploitable risk, my attack surface and the details around that. Exploits by type, testing configuration at a glance, my test scope, my domain, my IP address, my test coverage. So since this is Windows Authenticated pen testing, I've got a much smaller scope. I can see that Windows related risk very quickly. I get my host breakdown, number of hosts discovered, and then hosts exploited. My compromised credentials and what type of credential they are. The explanation of my credential harvesting. And the proof is we successfully created a folder on the host. I get into my exploit details now. My scoring, type, rank, full attack vectors for remediation or mitigation, description, solution, any references, my evidence, and then the vulnerability data. Here's my zero login. So we're going to give you that full remediation and mitigation advice for all of these issues, regardless whether they're exploitable or not. Any questions on Windows Authenticated Pen Testing pen test tasks? That's a mouthful.
Yeah. Yeah, Kevin, I think one other thing to point out is this scenario that you teed up is nearly done completing. And that was a matter of minutes. Most of these tasks within RidgeBot can complete within a matter of minutes or hours, and you're not just finding risk in a point in time, but also on a continuous basis. So it's very easy to have a good picture or snapshot of where the risks lie within your environment.
I can have a good overall look at the threats contained within my Windows environment by providing multiple levels of permissioned credentials. So I can get a good foothold on what a standard user is going to be able to do if one of those credentials get hijacked, good grief, an elevated user and then an admin user if need be. So I can look at multiple different aspects of my Windows domain and how vulnerable or exploitable it is with RidgeBot very quickly.
Excellent. And Kevin, we did have a question. Is it possible to download the complete sequence of an execution of a test?
Yes. So we can do that a couple of different ways. In my reporting, I can pull down just a raw data CSV and pivot that data with the attack logs. Or if I go into that specific test, I can download that attack log as well. This works really well for auditing, whether that's financial, SOC 2, anything like that. We've had multiple auditors accept our log and attack log download as a viable audit reference. And there was another question I saw pop up.
I believe that was someone's virtual assistant note taker, so we can disregard that for now.
And do you need me to stop sharing and hit some more slides?
I think we can pivot. Thank you for showing that side of our methodology. Sure. I think from here, we can pivot over to breach and attack simulation. Again, Absolutely. This is simulating whether or not your defensive controls, Active Directory, DLP solutions, etc., are doing their jobs effectively. A lot of organizations are spending thousands, if not millions of dollars on these tools. And what RidgeBot can do in this area is make sure that your investment is well locked down.
Absolutely. And anybody that's worked with EDR, XDR firewalls know that those types of tools need to be tuned on a regular basis. If you have a client or you are a managed detection and response client, you want to test the efficacy of that, the security controls around it. Make sure that those tools are blocking what needs to be blocked in the environment. And that's where the breach and attack simulations come into play is, with the pen testing scenarios, we're going to validate the security of our environment. With the breach and attack simulations, we are going to validate our security controls in our environment across 3 different pillars, with more to come in the future. So let's look at that data. I'm going to show you a caveat for our breach and attack simulations. You will need to install the RidgeBot botlet. I'm very hesitant to call this an agent because it self-destructs upon a reboot, a power cycle, or no communication with RidgeBot after 7 days. It resides in memory, and that botlet is what simulates the malicious file downloads and the hashes. Also does the data exfiltration and also recons and looks at Active Directory. If I go to my asset table, you can very quickly see which ones have the botlet installed and are online. I can also go to other active assets in my network, choose my proper thing, and then I go get my botlet install. For Windows 64-bit, it's PowerShell. For Linux, it's just a CLI command to get that, a curl command to get that installed. And again, once the asset or target has been rebooted, power cycled, and or hasn't talked to RidgeBot in at least 7 days, then these will go offline and the bot will self-destruct itself. And I saw that there was a question.
Yes, this question is, can you point me to a comparison between RidgeBot and main competitors such as Pentera, XM Cyber, or Tenable?
In how they do breach and attack simulations, or what our competitors are, who our competitors are?
Yeah, I would say we can start there.
Okay. In the breach and attack game, our main pen testing competition does not do breach and attack simulations. That's one of the differentiators between RidgeBot and some of our direct pen testing competitors. I will say that we did a pen test or a proof of concept against a company that was testing 2 breach and attack simulation only softwares. And with the holistic view and the view of the risk in the environment with RidgeBot, they chose RidgeBot to do their breach and attack simulation as well as their automated pen testing. So I think that we fare pretty well against even just the standard breach and attack simulation competitors. I won't say that we're better, but I think we hold our own.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I like to think of RidgeBot as a complete offensive security platform, not just an automated pen testing solution or a breach and attack simulation solution. So
Exactly.
That's one of the strengths of RidgeBot if you're looking for that holistic coverage from an offensive security perspective.
That is a good word, Dennis, holistic. So let's kick off a few breach and attack simulation tasks. So I can go to my attack simulation tasks if need be and create a new task. It's the same scenario. So since we just did Windows Authenticated, let's hit Active Directory first. So I'm going to give it a good name. So breach and attack simulation, Active Directory. That's what I'm going to call this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to manage my hosts. I'm going to go find my hosts. There's my Windows server. So I'm going to just choose that one. I'm good there. I'm going to go ahead and run it now. And I'm going to go to my next screen, which is my tactics, techniques, and procedures, my TTP screen. So I can alter this if need be, or I can leave it best practices. My first test, I would probably just leave this alone. If you need to not look for privilege escalation or credential access, you can uncheck those boxes and run this particular test. So very quickly, I didn't even have to put in domain. I just had to put in a Windows device with the botlet installed. And you can see it's found my device already, my target, and it's going through that and running those security control tests against Active Directory. So let's look at one that has completed. So I see here, and I can show multiple runs. I can show them all. I can look at the configuration of the test if need be, but I get a lot of good information already. I can see that a total of 25 scripts ran. 10 of them were blocked by my AD controls. 14 of them, however, were not blocked, and one wasn't applicable to this particular Windows device. I have a block rate of 41%, which is not great. It's not terrible, but I need that block rate to be much higher across my Active Directory security controls. I can see here what my block rate is, my threat group. I can see any of my TTP data, the execution, the persistence, any of my threat groups that were not blocked. So I get a lot of really good data. So if I want to look at my blocked scripts, I can do that. We blocked privilege escalation, gives me some information on that. So I don't really need to pay too much attention to this. I just need to know what they are. If I want to look at my not blocked or my issues, this is where it gets real interesting. So I've got command execution. It's a high risk, score of 5, gives me the goal of in the TTP action solutions. I can see the attack log if need be. I can look at my executing of WMI command. It tells me exactly what the goal, the technique was per this attack, and so on and so forth. So I can look at these issues by threat group if need be, specific threat group, or by tactic if need be. But I can very, very quickly get to the bottom of what's going on with my security controls, see what my Active Directory looks like, what's going on there. You can see I just reran the same one that I did. I'm getting the same block rate. If I want to report on that, it's a very simplified reporting. I can do that. We'll dump that in my reports. You can see that that's pretty quick to get that started. And then I can look at my report. I know I need to make it bigger. Date and timestamp of the actual report. Legalese. Report definitions or explanations. Gives you a good rundown of what's going on. And then the start of our executive summary. And I am going to ask why this is green. That bugs me that it's green. So just know that I'm going to ask why that's green. I didn't really care for that. So it's going to give us some test results, tell us what our block script rate was by threat group, tactics, techniques, unblocked scripts, their severity. And then we get into that risk and get through the severity, the asset, the type of issue it was, and then the mitigation for that issue. So quite a few issues on this particular host as far as Active Directory goes. A lot of issues on this particular host. Any questions on that? Breach and attack simulations focusing on Active Directory.
We did have one question, Kevin. Would you call this a white box test since we're using botlets and having access to the system within the organization? Or would that not be the appropriate term?
I hate to call it a white box test, but the botlet doesn't have admin control, but it has local control over the asset to simulate these types of attacks and scenarios. So I would almost call it gray plus, because we're putting different things in there. With the data exfiltration, I'm going to give it a document to try to get out of the network, things like that. So that's kind of where I would call it, gray plus.
Thank you, Kevin. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I know that's a goofy answer, but I mean, it kind of is what it is. So let's move on to endpoint protection and look at our endpoint security controls. So again, I'm going to create a new scenario. I'm going to choose my endpoint security because that's what I want to look at. I'm going to give it a good name. let me make that a capital. Okay, and again, if I want to put in a description, I can do that. I need to go find my 3 botlet hosts. So I'm going to use all 3 of them because I've got Ubuntu, Windows, and CentOS, and I need to check my security controls against those types of assets in my environment. So that's good. I'm going to run it now. But again, if this is a test I want to run on a regular basis, I can do that. Workstations can be Sundays and Thursdays. Servers, maybe I only want to do the last Saturday of the month, what have you. So I can set these up. I can set up my security validation on a recurring basis, which is my pen testing. And for my security control validation, I can also do that on a recurring basis. Next, you can see that this one has a lot more threat groups, a lot more tactics, and a lot more techniques to it because we're going to do a lot of different things to try to manipulate this asset and get a malicious hash or a file downloaded to this. Again, these are all customizable. If you don't want to look for hidden Cobra, you don't have to. You can uncheck that. But again, very easy to run. And I am checking against the security controls on endpoint for 3 of my hosts. Breach and attack simulation is not something that you necessarily need to run against the entire environment. What you need to do is pick different parts of your infrastructure and test the efficacy of those security controls across different areas of your client or your environment. I want to make that clear. This isn't something we're going to test 1,000 IPs on. If you've got 1,000 hosts, I'd probably hit 20 or 30 across different types of OSs, different parts of the network, different security controls and applications. So as that runs, let's go look at the breach and attack simulation for endpoint security. Okay, I have a very low block risk, a very low block rate. We have no EDR on the 2 Linux boxes, just IP tables, and we have only very minor EDR on the Windows device. So you can see my block rate is extremely low. I can see by threat groups where my risk lies. I can see across my tactics where that risk lies, and then my techniques of what wasn't and what was and wasn't blocked. If I go look at my blocked, I've got 2 out of 17 that were blocked. That's great. That was weird. If I look at my not blocked, we can see quite a few things. Akira ransomware payload, so that is not good. Gives me my techniques, my description, and my mitigation or remediation solution. If I look at the freakout, that's not a good one either. So we've got a lot of different things we can look at for this. So this is telling me that either A, I need to put some sort of EDR or XDR solution in here, block certain things in my firewall, or if I've got EDR deployed, I definitely need to tune this and make it more secure. If I go back out to that task, and let's create a report based on the endpoint security. Okay, again, date and timestamp. If you put your logo, it will be in the upper right-hand corner of the report. Legalese again. The nice thing about RidgeBot reporting is it's very uniform. You're not going to have to relearn multiple reports. They all kind of flow the same way. Report definitions. So this is our cyber emulation on endpoint security. Again, we see that block rate, unblocked versus blocked, not applicable based on the OS of the targets that we scanned. Results by threat group, results by tactics, and then results by technique. Our unblocked script risk with our scoring and the asset or target that was in scope. And then we start defining that risk and giving mitigation or remediation advice. So this particular set of targets is very susceptible to lots of different Doki backdoors, freak out. So my EDR, XDR software is not tuned properly, and I have problems in my environment that I need to address yesterday or very, very quickly. Any questions on endpoint breach and attack simulation?
We did have one question, actually a few questions here, Kevin. We'll start with the endpoint
Awesome.
testing. Does endpoint testing use fake malicious payloads? And is there a cleanup procedure for clearing the evidences?
So what the botlet is going to do, none of these attacks cause any harm. We don't delete anything. We don't physically download anything to the box. What it's going to do is it's going to try to move like an iCar hash file around in the network. I'll show you with the data exfiltration coming up. I'm going to give RidgeBot a document with fake personally identifiable information or PHI, PII type data. It's got my name. That's the only thing that's accurate. Everything else is fake. My address, a credit card number, a fake email, fake social number. So what RidgeBot, the botlet does is it simulates all of this. It's not actually doing it, but it also takes it far enough that it knows and can present the evidence to that security control exploit. Did that answer the question?
I think it did.
Okay.
Thank you, Kevin. And then one other question is, how long did this simulation take to run? And I think I can draw the attention to the timestamp that on this dashboard, if I'm not mistaken, Kevin.
Yes, correct. So we can also see that information inside the task rate and the reporting. Task completed. Where is that information? Let me see if it's in here. That's interesting. Let me look at the task. Start time 10:29. So this has been running about 6 minutes. I'll have to get that information. I'm kind of at a loss on where to see the time frame of how long that actually took to run. So I'll get that answer.
Thank you, Kevin. And the final question I see here is there a way to know if these tests are resource intensive, especially on the targets?
Typically, okay, so my background for the last 7 years was vulnerability and risk management, blue, purple teaming, that kind of stuff. I can take an Insight VM Rapid7 vulnerability scanner and cripple a network. This is a pen test and breach and attack simulation tool, so there are caveats to it. We need to proceed carefully. We need to not test large swaths of the enterprise the first test. So there are ways that we can mitigate the risk of that running it over, but in almost a year that I've been here, I have not seen any of these pen tests knock over a target yet.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay. I did caveat that by saying yet. So it's possible. If I can do it with a vulnerability scanner, I can definitely do it with RidgeBot. But there's guardrails that we can slow the test down, things to that nature, lighten the packet size, the speed of the test, things to that nature.
Oh, there was one more question. These breach and attack simulations cannot be run or tested without the botlets already pre-installed. Is that correct?
That is correct. And again, the botlet is self-destructing upon reboot, power cycle, or 7 days since speaking to. So if I let all of these botlets sit and I don't test them again in 7 days, they will all automatically self-destruct.
Thanks, Kevin. Hopefully that answered the question.
Sure. Okay, so we've looked at Windows Authenticated pen testing. We've looked at Active Directory breach and attack simulation, as well as endpoint security breach and attack simulation. Let's pivot over to data exfiltration and what that looks like. So again, I'll create a new task, pick my data exfiltration breach and attack simulation. Give it a good name. Go look for my botlets. And since this is data exfiltration, I want to do this across all of my assets on those 3 different OSs as well. So I've loaded my targets. I'm going to run it now. I do have a file that I'm going to give RidgeBot to simulate exfiltrating this out of the network. It contains personal data, so let me go grab that. Let's see, there we go, exfil doc. I've loaded it. Then I click next to get to my TTPs. This doesn't look like it's got a lot going on, but there's literally 44 different scripts that this is going to run. Exfiltration is one technique or tactic, and then exfiltrating over alternative protocols is the technique we're going to use. So RidgeBot is now going to take that file that I gave it, and with the botlet, it's going to hand it over to the botlet residing on the target. That botlet is going to try to encrypt that file multiple different ways and use multiple different protocols to try to exfiltrate it to the edge of the network. Any questions on that? What we're looking for is data loss prevention controls and tools, their efficacy, and whether they need to be tuned or not. So let me get into my data exfiltration task. I have 0 DLP software on any of these. This is an expected block rate. If you had a data loss prevention tool or web application firewall, standard firewall, and you've got a 0 to 25% block rate, you've got issues in the environment. If 132 total scripts contained in those 44 playbooks and not blocked, I have 132 different ways that RidgeBot was able to exfiltrate this out of the network, even using XOR encrypted data. I mean, I haven't heard of that one in years, but you can see the different protocols, the different encryptions that RidgeBot is trying to use to exfiltrate this. And it was successful in all of these different exfiltration techniques and tactics. So these 3 assets have a lot of problems. And I can look at each individual asset and see where its vulnerabilities lie. Obviously, this was successful, no blocks, gives me my individual targets and their block rates, and then my TTPs and what those look like. If I go back out, go to my data exfiltration and do a report on that. Again, very easy to do. I have done very little pre-work other than getting my domain and credential information for my web or my Windows Authenticated pen testing. And I've had to provide very little information except for domain information or installing the botlet to validate my security controls and look at what's going on across my environment, across my different OSs, my different tool sets, and my different areas of security validation within the environment. So let's look at the data exfiltration report. Again, date and timestamp, report definitions, some testing rundown. Obviously, we blocked 0. Here's our start finish. I knew I saw this somewhere, so I don't remember who had the question. Here's your testing time. So this test took about 18 minutes, 19 minutes. 18 minutes total. Okay. I knew I had seen that. These are fairly new, so that's why I wasn't able to just immediately tell you where that was at. We can see here across the 3 assets, we ran those 44 scripts per each and had a 0% block rate on all. TTPs, unblocked its script, and you can see it's exfiltrating my document out. Yes, this is an old test that I pre-ran since the current tasks are continually running. So I can do a report preview on those tasks, but not a full report. Yep. So here we've got exfiltrating with triple DES over DNS, triple DES over HTTP, TCP, so on and so forth. So I've got a lot of data loss prevention issues in my environment. And it's giving this across the 3 assets, all the way down to that very last one, exfiltrate XOR encrypted via UDP. So very quickly and very easily, with little or zero prep work, I can test my Windows domain environment for Windows Authenticated pen testing results. And I can also validate the security controls against 3 pillars in my environment: data loss prevention or data exfiltration, endpoint security, and Active Directory. Again, we have more scenarios in the pipeline. I can't tell you what those are just yet, but we're working to get those done and into the tool for use and to help you continue to continuously expose the threat in the environment and validate the security controls within your environment or your client's environments. Any questions?
Thank you, Kevin. We did have one question. It seems that at least for breach and attack simulation, it's very botlet dependent. And the question was, how do these botlets not just become an attack surface on their own, or do they self-destruct, etc.?
They do self-destruct. That's why. So, I've deployed EDR, XDR, dealt with thousands of agents in my life. An agent is persistent. It doesn't go away. RidgeBot will self-destruct after a reboot of the asset or target, after a power cycle of the asset or target, or if it does not speak to RidgeBot within 7 days, it will self-destruct.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the group?
All right. I will quit sharing and turn it back over fully to Dennis. I really appreciate everybody's time and allowing us to showcase RidgeBot's pen testing and breach and attack simulations. And Kenneth, I think's got a question about getting access.
We can talk offline, Kenneth, about that for sure.
Yep.
Well, thank you, everyone. If there's no more questions, again, RidgeBot is a holistic offensive security tool that spans automated pen testing and breach and attack simulation. Kevin was able to show a few of the scenarios today, but it's meant to stay ahead of those threat actors out there already using AI. So we like to say offense is your best defense, and RidgeBot is at the forefront of that.
Good analogy. I like that. All right.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining. Hopefully this was productive, and we'll see you next month for the next session.